Hey, welcome back to Tech Tip Tuesday. Today we're going to be talking about choose your own adventure designs and some best practices and things to consider when you're trying to write this kind of quilt pattern. I'm going to preface this all by saying that in general, I try to avoid choose your own adventure designs purely because they are so difficult to write well. There's a few people that I've seen do it well, and that's the example you see on the left here. This is the Maiden quilt pattern by Erin Holmes of Hexen House, and she does a really great job of this kind of choose your own adventure style. So if you're looking to see what kind of best practice is, I encourage you to purchase one of her patterns and just have a look at it. She's kind of mastered this art of choose your own adventures designs, but in general, these things are difficult to write well, and if they're not written well, the pattern can kind of become a hot mess pretty quickly. So what exactly is a choose your own adventure design? Well, there's lots of things that can make it that way. Some examples of this are like alternate layouts. So that's what you see over here in the example that I have. She's got basically 4 or 5 different base block elements, right? And depending on which ways you rotate them when you're doing the final assembly, you get a completely different quilt. It's pretty cool stuff. Alternate block centers is another one. I've seen some folks where they're doing like a Christmas bauble, right? And you'll have an option for like a pinwheel in the center or like an Ohio star or an 8-point star or something like that. And you can kind of swap those center featured blocks independently of each other and choose which ones you want. Alternate block assembly is another one. I've seen some patterns where you've got like one main block motif and then there's an option for like a smaller repeat of that you can combine into larger blocks, and you can kind of choose how many of those that you want to have in your design. Different colorways is another one. A lot of times I'll see patterns that have like a 2-color version, a 4-color version, an 8-color version, 12-color version, right? Like all of these different versions. It's the same quilt, same assembly methods, but because you've got basically a different set of cutting instructions and fabric requirements for each one. And then when you get to start making the subunits, you've got different quantities of each because now you've got more colors for the options that have additional fabrics in them. So that's like another variety of a choose your own adventure design. We often don't think about it like that because I think having different colorways is very common for a lot of quilt patterns, but depending on how many you have and how different they are, this can really become very complicated. So just as like a broad statement, I generally discourage choose your own adventure patterns, but there are some scenarios where it does make sense and it can really add a lot to a pattern, but it has to be done very intentionally and very organized, or else it just turns into a mess. So let's talk about some best practices, what to do if you decide that you really do want to do kind of one of these choose your own adventure patterns. The first thing you need to really watch out for is any kind of disorganization. You need to really think hard and long about how to organize this thing to make it feel very approachable and easy for your reader. So we're talking about lots of tables, very, very well-defined headers, sections where you know exactly which versions it applies to and which it doesn't. All of that goes into making this feel a lot easier than it looks. And that's important for like any pattern, but it's really, really important when it comes to these choose your own adventure designs. The other thing to watch out for is different assembly methods, right? If the variations that you're including in your pattern require different assembly methods, where you're going to have like sections that only apply to one version and sections that only apply to another version. And the mechanisms, the methods that you're using to assemble things are completely different, almost like you've got 2 parallel paths. That's a situation you kind of want to avoid, right? So if you've got 2 different options and they use the same methods, that's a good vote towards putting it in the same pattern. But if those 2 options really result in 2 different patterns, that's a good indicator that you should probably just split these into 2 patterns and market them completely differently, even if they're based on the same motif. Because again, it just gets too disorganized. Otherwise, there's too many moving parts. It's too hard to follow for your reader. Ambiguity around your fabric requirements and cutting instructions is another thing to watch out for. If it's not very clear for your reader which table they're following, which cutting instructions they're following, if they're picking and choosing some cutting instructions from this version and some cutting instructions from that version because there's just too many options, that's going to be really hard to follow. You want to make it very clear cut. If you're doing this version, you're following this table. You're not looking at the rest of the tables. If you're making this version, you're following this table and forget about the rest, right? So separating it out and making them very distinct so that there's no opportunity for confusion is a really important piece of this kind of choose your own adventure type of pattern. Similarly, there can be a lot of ambiguity around the quilt top assembly instructions, right? Because this is where things become different, right? You have different layouts, different colorways, different block placements, what have you, right? Whatever element you're mixing into this design your own adventure pattern. So making sure you have very clearly labeled your sections. Hey, follow this if you're making the baby and twin size. Skip to step 9 if you're making any of the other sizes, right? Making those very clear delineations so there's no opportunity to get confused as to which section applies to the version your reader is making. That's really important. So those are some like general guidelines, but in general, right, I would never have like more than 1 or 2 choose your own adventure elements in a single quilt pattern. Any more than that, and it just gets too chaotic. Even with just 1 or 2, if it's not done well, you can really run into some problems as far as like ease of following for your reader, which again, that's the number one thing when it comes to quilt patterns. You always need to make sure that you're making this as easy and approachable for your reader as possible. So anytime you're in this situation where it just feels like you're getting too much going on, you're hitting like the 20-page mark or something like that, there's just a lot of instructions and a lot of moving parts to the pattern, that's when you want to start thinking about paring down. And I know it's really hard because you get attached to the design and attached to the pattern the way you originally designed it, but you're not doing your reader any favors if you've just got too much going on and it's really not a fun experience for them to make the quilt pattern. You want this to be enjoyable and easy and relaxing. That's why most people quilt. So always keep that in mind. And unfortunately, that means letting go of some of the things that you really love about the design. In writing and publishing, we call that killing the darlings, and it's really painful, right? You get really attached to things, but it's for the best interest of your reader, which is the whole purpose of this. So always, always keep that perspective in mind. Alrighty, that's all I've got for you today. If you found this video helpful, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you back here next week for another episode of Tech Tip Tuesday.